Hi, this is Len Furman, the sports time traveler, inviting you to go back in time 70 years with me to 1954 for an article titled, Can Diane Leather Break 5 Minutes for the Mile and Live? I start out with a special dedication. Today's article is dedicated to my high school cross country coach, Jack Brophy, who instilled in me a lifelong passion for competitive running. As I competed internationally in masters and senior track competitions into my 50s, I never forgot the foundation in the sport I received from Coach Brophy. And the older I get, the more I'm able to fully appreciate what Coach Brophy did for my friends and I on the cross country team. He genuinely cared about the well being of each runner on the team. He wanted the team to win, but he also wanted us to learn from the experience and for each of us to fulfill our potential. One of my greatest personal moments in the sport that I will share with you at the end of this article could not have been reached without the initial guidance I received from Coach Brophy. Thanks, Coach. And now, background for today's story. In the 1928 Olympics in Amsterdam, track events for women were contested for the first time. The longest event was the 800-meter run, roughly half a mile. Several female runners collapsed after completing the 800-meter run. Another fainted in the locker room. Lawson Robertson, the head coach of the USA track team, was quoted in the San Francisco Examiner on August 3, 1928, saying, "I wasn't surprised to see many girls collapse at the end of this grueling race for women." The all-male officials that operated the track meet and the Olympic Games determined that races of 800 meters or longer were so dangerous for those of the weaker sex that the next generation of official competitions were not run with races longer than 400 meters, just one lap on the track, nor were official world records maintained at distances of 1 mile or longer for women. The women's 800-meter run was not included in the Olympics again until 1960 in Rome. With that bit of history, I'd like to introduce you to a brave young woman named Diane Leather, who was 22 years old in May 1954 when Roger Bannister broke the 4-minute mile barrier for men. Diane Leather. A couple of months ago, I received a tip from my friend Glenn, who told me that Diane Leather, a British middle distance runner, made an attempt in 1954 to become the first woman to break the 5-minute mile. I was already following Roger Bannister each day in 1954, so it was easy for me to also keep track of Diane Leather. It turned out to be a fascinating journey. Now, come back with me to 1954. A primer on the women's world record for the mile run. Here in 1954, there is no official world record for the mile run for women. Women are deemed too fragile to safely run a mile. This has not stopped many courageous British women from running the mile. Here is the progression of the unofficial record for the women's mile through the summer of 1953. The women's mile had been completely dominated by the British at this point, and 5 minutes was inching closer, but still appeared to be years away. 6:13 was run by Elizabeth Atkinson of the United Kingdom on June 24, 1921. That was the first time an unofficial world record for the mile had been documented. Next was 5:27.5 by Ruth Christmas on August 20th, 1932. Then 5:24 for Gladys Lunn on June 1st, 1936. 6 weeks later, Gladys Lunn ran 5:23 on July 18th, 1936. And the next year, she ran 5:20.8 on May 8th, 1937. Later that summer, she ran 5:17 on August 7th, 1937. 2 years later, on July 22nd, 1939, Evelyn Forster ran 5:15.3. Then another 13 years passed until the record was lowered again by Ann Oliver on June 14, 1952, with a 5:11. Then on June 4th, 1953, Enid Harding ran 5:09.8. And then Ann Oliver took the record back again with 5:08 on September 12th, 1953. Stunning progress. Enter Diane Leather. In an international women's mile race on the track in the White City Stadium in London, site of the 1908 Olympic Games, on September 30th, 1953, Diane Leather destroyed a field that included former world record holder Enid Harding. Leather took the lead at the half mile and won by a wide margin. Leather's time stood out even more, 5:02.6. Diane Leather had taken more than 5 seconds off the unofficial world record, and more importantly, she put herself just outside the 5-minute mile barrier. The October 1st, 1953 London Daily Telegraph reported, Diane Leather of Birchfield Harriers put the 5-minute mile for women within as close striking distance as the 4-minute mile for men. Miss Leather ran a truly magnificent race. A newcomer to the sport, Diane's great race marked the culmination of an amazing first full year as a distance runner. Diane Leather had not taken up the sport until 1952, when she at first thought she might like hurdle racing after watching the Helsinki Olympics that summer. But she quickly learned that she had natural talent in the longer runs, and she soon won the Midlands and National Cross Country Championship. Public interest in the 5-minute mile. Immediately after Roger Bannister became the first man to break 4 minutes for the mile back on May 6th, the British press began to focus on the possibility that perhaps Diane Leather could become the first woman to break the 5-minute mile. Late in 1953, a Romanian Edith Trebel had further shaved the women's mile world record, the unofficial world record, down to 5 minutes flat, 0.3. Cutting 2 seconds off the mark set by Diane Leather. There are no accounts of this race by Edith Trebel, but clearly the 5-minute mile was on notice as track season was underway in 1954 and Bannister's race had elevated the sport of running the mile to its peak. Naturally, as the sports time traveler, I had to stay here in 1954 and follow Diane's progress. My sports time travel updates on Diane Leather. Birmingham, England, May 7th, 1954. The Birmingham Weekly Post reported an update on Diane Leather today. The story is as much about whether Miss Leather can break the 5-minute mile barrier as it is about the potential ill effects of trying to make the attempt. The newspaper reported, it is confidently expected she will be inside the 5-minute mark before the end of her second year. Opinions may be divided as to whether or not women should take part in competitive athletics, which undoubtedly make heavy demands on physical attributes. But Miss Leather had no hesitation in saying that, far from feeling any ill effects from her efforts, she feels all the better. And as the daughter of a distinguished surgeon, it may be taken for granted that she would not have been encouraged to go on with the sport if there had been any reason to suppose it would do her any physical harm. Birmingham, England, May 15th, 1954. The newspaper Sports Argus here in Birmingham, England, wrote the following today. There can be little doubt that Diane Leather will be the first girl to run a mile inside 5 minutes. Birchfielders hope she may do the trick at their opening meeting on May 26. Birmingham, England, May 22nd, 1954. A story about Diane appeared again in Sports Argus today here in Birmingham. It was titled, Can Diane Succeed? Here are some excerpts from the story. Next Wednesday evening, May 26, will be the Midland Women's Mile Team Race. It seems pretty obvious who will be the first girl to finish. And if Diane Leather finds suitable conditions to permit her being the first girl to beat 5 minutes, such a success on her own track will be popularly received. Birmingham, England, May 23rd, 1954. Last night, Diane Leather ran the 880 yards, half a mile, in the Staffordshire Championships here in Birmingham. Diane won the race in a time of 2:16.4, just 3.8 seconds off the official world record. Yes, world records are maintained for the half mile for women. The headline in the Sunday Mercury in Birmingham for the track meet read, Diane only 3.8 seconds outside the best. Birmingham, England, May 24, 1954. The Birmingham Evening Mail included a story about Diane titled Women's Mile Record Attempt. The start of the article read, provided conditions are favorable, Miss Diane Leather, the Birchfield Harrier, will attempt to run the mile in 5 minutes, a feat never before accomplished by a woman, at Wednesday's spring meeting of her club. Birmingham, May 25, 1954. Today, the Evening Dispatch newspaper here in Birmingham featured an article with a giant headline on the top of page 7, Will Diane break the 5-minute mile tomorrow? The article included this passage. Diane Leather already holds the British record with 5 minutes 2.6 seconds. This is 2.3 seconds slower than the best European time alleged to have been made by Edith Tremble, Romania. There is no official world's record. Previewing the upcoming mile race and Diane's potential to beat the 5-minute barrier, the newspaper wrote, there is no one more capable of beating the watch at this distance, but the Birchfield girl will have to do all her own running and at the same time have to contend with the weather conditions, which, unless there is a rapid change for the better, are by no means conducive to record breaking. The writer was indicating that there would not be any competition strong enough to push Diane to the record, nor would there be anyone to pace her in the early going as Roger Bannister had in his 4-minute mile record race a little more than 2 weeks ago. Birmingham, England, May 26, 1954. On the day of the race, the Birmingham Gazette ran a front-page story with a preview of the race that included a nice picture of Diane, and you can see this picture in the written version of this article on Substack. The article was titled, She Hopes to Do a Bannister Today. The opening line of the article read, Diane Leather, 22-year-old daughter of a Birmingham surgeon, hopes to become the world's fastest woman miler tonight. This tall, slender Birmingham University microanalyst is to try to run a mile in 5 minutes. For a woman, a feat equivalent to Roger Bannister's 4-minute mile. The article also noted that she spent all last evening sitting for an examination as part of her training at the university laboratory. This morning, she will go to the laboratory and put in her usual day's work. The women's mile race is at 8:25 p.m. tonight. The article concluded with this. There is only one small cloud on Miss Leather's bright horizon. There is no officially recognized women athletes mile in the International Amateur Athletic Federation's calendar of records. Birmingham, England, May 27th, 1954. Diane was very nervous prior to the start of the race last night. The Birmingham Evening Mail called her Nervous Diane in the subheading of an article on the race. They reported that before the race, she had to face a battery of a dozen reporters, 9 newspaper photographers, and a TV camera crew. In the race, she ran the first quarter mile in 74 seconds, which is just under 5-minute mile pace. The newspaper then wrote, quote, soon after the first lap, she broke away on her own for the rest of the race. She had to set her own pace, a difficult task which was made no easier by the wind. She was not distressed at all when she finished. In fact, Miss Leather was in remarkably good condition. Diane came through the half mile just over 5-minute pace at 2:30.8, according to the Liverpool Daily Post. On the third lap, she slowed down further, coming through the 3/4 mile mark at 3:48.6. Now Diane needed a last lap of 71.3 seconds to beat 5 minutes. On the last lap, the Liverpool Daily Post reported, Cheered on by a crowd of about 2,000, Miss Leather, now running alone as the others were so far behind, finished with a dramatic burst against the slight breeze. But she fell just shy of the goal, with a final time of 5 minutes, 0.2 seconds. The London Daily Telegraph reported on the race under the headline, Miss Leather fails by 0.2 seconds. The time at least gave Diane the unofficial world record, bettering the 5 minutes, 0.3 reportedly run by Edith Trebel of Romania last November. The Daily Herald, a London paper, ran a picture of Diane on the front page of the paper with a headline that read, "A world record, but." The Daily Herald wrote that Diane was disappointed, but still smiling. Talking about her performance, she told the newspaper, "Perhaps I failed because I had no pacemaker, but it was my intention to do a 5-minute mile purely on my own efforts." Diane's approach is in stark contrast to the team approach Roger Bannister deployed when he arranged to have world-class runners Chris Brasher and Chris Chataway pace him through the first 3 laps of the 4-lap mile race in his 3:59.4 mile almost 3 weeks ago in Oxford. Diane then indicated that she has actually already broken the 5-minute barrier unofficially. "I have done better in training, but I think the excitement and knowing I was being timed by AAA experts rather put me off." Then she told the Birmingham Gazette, "I'm going home to bed for a night's solid sleep. I have to sit for an examination tomorrow." No more 5-minute mile attempts till the fall. The Birmingham Evening Mail delivered the news that must be disappointing to all British track fans. Quote, "It is understood that she, Diane, will not attempt another 5-minute mile until the Birchfield Harriers floodlit meeting in Birmingham on October 2. The reason for this was made clear by her coach, who explained in the Birmingham Gazette that Diane will be training for the half mile because that is the official women's track distance race." Birmingham, England, May 30, 1954. Last night was the Midland Women's Championship track meet in Birmingham. Diane was focusing on running the 800 meters, and she won that race in a new British record time of 2 minutes 14.1 seconds, which was just 1 second off the official world record. Immediately after her record-breaking 800-meter race, Diane Leather made a surprise announcement. The London Daily Mirror reported that she said, "I feel fine. I'm going to have a go at the double." This meant that Diane Leather was going to run the mile, which was scheduled to take place just 30 minutes later. This was completely unplanned. In fact, her coach, Mrs. Nelson Neal, tried to talk Diane out of it. The Birmingham Gazette wrote, "Mrs. Neal tried to dissuade her. The weather was hopeless for record breaking, and the 800 meters had been a grueling race. But Miss Leather persisted." The Daily Mirror reported, "When the race started, few of those present knew that Diane was in the race." After the first lap, Diane was on a very fast pace with a time of 68.8 seconds for the quarter mile, according to the Birmingham Post. That would be a mile pace of under 4:36. At the half mile, Diane was clocked in 2:27, still well under 5-minute pace. But after the very fast first lap, she had slowed down to a second quarter mile of just 78.2 seconds. The Daily Mirror wrote, "It was not until the timekeeper's announcement of 3:46.3 for the 3/4 that the crowd realized she had a great chance to crack 5 minutes. Indeed, Diane, running in the lead, all alone again, with no one to pace her, and 100 yards ahead of the closest runner, had passed the 3/4 miles over 2 full seconds faster than in her 5-minute mile attempt 3 days earlier. The crowd was thrilled by the time, but in fact, Diane was continuing to slow down after the fast opening quarter. Her third lap time was just 79.3 seconds. Her present pace would not be fast enough to get her to the finish line under 5 minutes. Then Diane found another gear. The London Sunday People wrote, as she moved into the straight, she lengthened her stride superbly and raced on to finish 160 yards ahead of the second girl. The London Sunday Mirror wrote about her finishing burst. Diane lengthened her stride admirably and raced on to achieve her ambition. After she crossed the line, she was, quote, immediately surrounded by cheering clubmates. She had done it. Her final time was 4:59.6. She had run the last quarter mile on her own in just 73.3 seconds. Diane Leather had broken the 5-minute barrier for the mile, the first woman ever to do it. Diane had a great feeling of achievement. The Birmingham Post reported, when told the figures, she simply said, at last, and seemed relieved it was over. She told the Birmingham Gazette, I'm thrilled, but so glad it is all over. I knew I could do it if there was no fuss and bother. Several newspapers also noted that Diane felt fine after the race. No ill effects from running a British record 800 and unofficial world record mile within 30 minutes of each other. Diane's father was there to see the record runs too. The London Sunday Dispatch reported Dr. James Leather was as excited as his daughter. Marvelous, he kept saying. The Dispatch further quoted Diane saying, after Wednesday's attempt on May 26, I felt I could break this 5-minute mile, so I decided to have another go without fuss or bother. That is why I did not tell anybody until after the 800 meters and until after I knew how I felt. Worldwide news. The news of the 5-minute barrier being broken was reported around the world. The New York Times featured a large picture of Diane on page 129 of the Sunday, May 30th, 1954 paper. The AP story included this passage. A 5-minute mile in women's track and field had been looked upon as the sport's greatest goal. The Los Angeles Times wrote about the race. A good-looking laboratory analyst ran a mile in 4:59.6, the fastest ever for a woman. But still not an official world record. The New York Times also pointed out there is no world record for the distance, as a mile is not authorized in International Amateur Athletic Federation regulations. Next up for Diane. The London Daily Mirror reported that Diane said after the race, thank goodness that's over. Now I can concentrate on my chemistry exams. Diane has additional summer plans after her exams. She will prepare to run the 800 meters in the European Games, the most important track meet in the world this year. That track meet gets underway at the end of July. The Sports Time Traveler will continue following Diane Leather in 1954. An additional 5-minute mile story by the Sports Time Traveler. The Sports Time Traveler can personally relate to this story of breaking the 5-minute mile, as I ran many sub-5 miles and also attempted the feat at the age of 50. Runner's World published an article in 2015 in which I wrote about my quest to run the 5-minute mile at age 50. You can read the article at the link I've provided here in the written version of the Substack article. You can also simply Google under 5 at 50 years old to find the article. Running 5-minute miles was something I was able to do routinely between the age of 16 and 41. When I wrote the article in 2015, I described the moment that I formulated the goal of running a 5-minute mile at age 50. Unfortunately, Runner's World decided to cut that paragraph from the article as they published it. Now, I'd like to share with you the paragraph that the Runner's World editors cut from my article. Somewhere along the path to turning 50, about 3 years ago, a thought popped into my head. For the very first time, I had the notion that it would be awesome if I could run a 5-minute mile again when I reached the age of 50. It was a small epiphany. I realized that this goal was so gigantic that achieving it would bring a sense of self-satisfaction and accomplishment that I perhaps had never felt before in 35 years of participating in track and field. It would be akin to a Lifetime Achievement Award, a testimonial to the benefit of keeping myself in good shape for half a century. It was a goal so special, so unique, that it could not even be attempted until I had finally aged. It wasn't just running the 5-minute mile once more, it was doing it at the age of 50. And in the written version of this Substack article, I provided you a picture of me on the day in December 2013 when I achieved my goal. Thanks again, Coach Brophy, and thanks to all my readers. And please share the Sports Time Traveler.